Hey there, and welcome to Crime for Sleep. I know you're having trouble falling asleep, so let me keep you company with true crime stories from around the world. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where did you first hear this one? If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's case. Story 1, I sealed it months ago. Hammered wood over the opening, stuffed it with insulation, poured in concrete just to be sure. And yet sometimes at night I hear it low, rhythmic sounds coming from beneath the floor, not rodents, not wind breathing, heavy and patient. I once lay flat on the kitchen tile with my cheek to the ground. The sound grew louder, then something thumped once, hard enough to rattle the plates in the cupboard. The seal is intact, but I know it's still down there. Whatever I buried wasn't ready to stay buried. The house smelled different after I sealed the crawl space. Not unpleasant exactly, but wrong. Like damp earth mixed with something metallic, something that made my throat tighten when I breathed too deeply. I told myself it was just the concrete curing, the insulation settling. Houses have their own chemistry, their own way of processing change. But the smell grew stronger at night, seeping through floorboards I'd thought were solid. I started keeping notes, small things at first, the way my coffee mug felt warmer on certain mornings, how the refrigerator hummed differently when I walked past. The bathroom mirror reflected my face slightly off-center, as if the glass had shifted in its frame. I measured it with a ruler. The reflection was exactly where it should be, but my eyes insisted otherwise. The breathing sounds became more frequent. Not every night, but often enough that I found myself lying awake, listening. The rhythm was almost hypnotic, in, out, like a massive lung working beneath my feet. I recorded it once, holding my phone against the floor for an entire hour. When I played it back, there was only silence punctuated by the occasional creak of settling wood. I called a contractor. He poked around the foundation, checked for moisture, tested the air quality. Everything normal, he said. No signs of gas leaks, no structural damage. The concrete seal was perfect, professional grade. He complimented my work, said he couldn't have done it better himself. I didn't tell him why I'd sealed it in the first place. The first time I saw it move was on a Tuesday. I was washing dishes when I noticed the kitchen floor wasn't quite level. Not warped, I'd checked that a dozen times, but somehow uneven beneath my feet. As I watched, a section near the sink seemed to rise slightly, like something was pushing up from below. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the dish soap bottle tipped over. I knelt down and pressed my palm against the spot. The floor felt solid, but warm, too warm. As I held my hand there, I could swear I felt the faintest vibration, like a heartbeat transmitted through wood and concrete. My palm grew damp with sweat, or maybe something else was making it moist. I jerked my hand away and saw a slight discoloration where I'd touched, a darker patch that faded slowly back to normal. The contractor had left behind a moisture meter. I used it obsessively, checking every square inch of the floor. The readings were consistent, normal, but when I placed the device over the sealed crawlspace entrance, the needle would flutter, just barely, but enough to make me doubt the machine's accuracy. I bought 3 more meters. They all showed the same subtle fluctuation. At night, I began to hear whispers, not voices, something more primitive than that, like air being pushed through a complex system of chambers and passages. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, transmitted through the bones of the house itself. I pressed my ear to different walls, trying to locate the source. The whispers grew clearer against the bathroom tiles, as if the plumbing carried the sound upward. I started sleeping in the living room, as far from the sealed crawlspace as possible. But distance didn't matter. The house had become a resonating chamber, every board and beam conducting whatever was happening below. Even with pillows wrapped around my head, I could feel the rhythm in my chest, matching my own breathing until I couldn't tell where I ended and it began. The breaking point came when I found the crack, a hairline fissure in the concrete, barely visible but definitely there. It ran from the edge of the wooden covering toward the center, like the seal was being tested from within. I mixed fresh concrete and filled the crack, smoothing it until it was invisible. By morning, it had returned, wider than before. I spent the next week reinforcing the seal. More wood, more concrete, a layer of steel mesh. The whispers grew louder during my work, as if my efforts were being observed and evaluated. The floor beneath my knees felt unstable, shifting slightly with each hammer blow. Sweat dripped from my forehead onto the fresh concrete, and where it landed, the surface seemed to absorb it too quickly. On the final night of my repairs, I fell asleep on the kitchen floor, exhausted from the work. I dreamed of vast spaces beneath the house, chambers that extended far beyond the foundation, filled with something that was almost but not quite alive. In the dream, I was lying on the floor just as I was in reality, but the floor was transparent, and I could see down into the breathing darkness below. I woke to find myself exactly where I'd fallen asleep, but the floor beneath my body was warm and slightly soft, like living tissue. The breathing sounds had stopped. In the silence, I could hear my own heartbeat, amplified and echoed back to me through the floorboards. I pressed my ear to the ground one more time. The thumping returned, but now it came from directly beneath my head. Not one impact, but a series of them, like something large and patient testing the boundaries of its prison. The wooden covering I'd installed months ago groaned under pressure. The concrete cracked audibly. And then, for just a moment, I felt the floor give slightly, as if something was pushing up from below with increasing strength. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the living room, but the thumping followed me. It wasn't coming from the crawl space anymore. It was coming from everywhere beneath the house, as if the entire foundation had become a drum skin stretched over something vast and alive. The whispers returned, louder now, forming almost words that I couldn't quite understand but somehow recognized. The house still stands, I still live here, but I've stopped trying to reinforce the seal. The cracks return within hours, and each repair only seems to make the presence below more active. Sometimes I place my hand on the floor and feel it push back, gentle but insistent. The breathing has synchronized with my own, and I've noticed that my reflection in the mirror now shows someone who looks older, more hollow-eyed, as if something has been slowly draining from me. The smell has changed too. It's not unpleasant anymore, it's familiar, almost comforting. Like coming home to a place I've never been but somehow remember. And late at night, when the whispers grow clear enough to almost understand, I find myself listening more carefully, leaning closer to the floor. Because I'm starting to realize that whatever is down there isn't trying to escape, it's trying to communicate, and I'm beginning to understand that the crawl space was never really sealed at all. It was just the beginning of something much larger, something that has been patiently expanding its boundaries, one breath at a time. The house breathes with me now, and I'm no longer certain where the foundation ends and I begin. Story 2, I never noticed it until my hand brushed the top of the frame. I used to walk under it easily. Now I have to duck. It's subtle, just a few centimeters each day, but it's real. The wood feels swollen, almost warm, like it's stretching, expanding. The strange part, the room inside hasn't changed at all. It's still cramped, still dark, but the doorframe keeps rising, widening, reshaping itself. I put marks on the wall to track the changes. They're gone now, scrubbed clean overnight. I think the doorway wants something else to fit through. The first morning I noticed the scratches, I convinced myself they were always there. Old wood settles, paint cracks, buildings shift. But when I ran my fingers along the frame, the texture felt different, rougher, like bark growing over smooth lumber. The smell hit me then, damp earth and something metallic, like copper pennies left in rain. I measured the frame with a ruler, 198 centimeters high. I wrote it down, tucked the paper in my pocket. The next morning I measured again, 201 centimeters. My handwriting stared back at me from the crumpled paper. The numbers matched, but the frame had grown. I started documenting everything. Photos from the same angle, measurements twice daily, notes about the texture and temperature. The wood pulse seemed to pulse under my palm, a rhythm just slower than my heartbeat. When I pressed my ear against it, I heard something like water moving through pipes, but the building was old and dry. No plumbing ran through these walls. The room beyond the frame remained unchanged. Same faded wallpaper, same water stain on the ceiling, same musty air that made my throat itch. But the doorway itself kept expanding, stretching upward and outward like a mouth opening wider. I found myself avoiding it, taking longer routes through the house, but I couldn't stop watching it. On the fourth day, I heard the first sound, a whisper barely audible coming from somewhere inside the frame itself, not the room beyond the wood. I pressed my ear closer and heard what sounded like breathing, slow, deep, patient. I jerked away, but the sound followed me. It was inside my head now, matching my own breath until I couldn't tell which was which. I tried to block the doorway with furniture. A bookshelf fit perfectly across the opening, but when I woke up, the shelf had been moved aside, not broken or damaged, just relocated with surgical precision. The frame had grown another 2 centimeters overnight. My measurements confirmed it. The wood was warm enough now that I could feel the heat radiating from it even from a distance. The whispers became clearer, not words exactly, but intentions, a hunger that made my stomach clench. I started sleeping in the farthest room, but the sounds carried through the walls, scraping, settling, growing. The entire house seemed to bend around that expanding doorway, walls bowing inward like they were being pulled by invisible strings. I called a contractor. He measured the frame, frowned at his tape measure, measured again. According to his instruments, the doorway was standard size, 198 centimeters. He looked at me like I was losing my mind. But when he walked through the frame, I watched him duck instinctively, his shoulders hunching as if something was pressing down on him. After he left, I measured again, 212 centimeters. The frame was learning to hide itself from others. Only I could see what it was becoming. The wood had developed a grain pattern that hurt to look at directly, swirling, hypnotic, like staring into deep water. When I touched it now, my hand came away damp with a substance that smelled like old rain and rust. I tried to leave, packed a bag, headed for the front door, but my feet carried me back to the growing frame. I stood before it, watching the wood pulse and shift, listening to the whispers that had become a constant murmur in my ears. The room beyond looked different now, deeper. The far walls seemed to stretch away into darkness that my eyes couldn't penetrate. Something moved in that darkness, not a shadow. Shadows have edges. This was absence given form, a void that breathed and watched and waited. I reached out without meaning to, my hand drawn toward the frame. The wood felt like skin now, warm and slightly yielding. My fingers sank into it, and I felt something take hold of my wrist. The pull was gentle but insistent, not forcing me through, but inviting, welcoming. The whispers became a symphony of voices, all speaking in languages I didn't recognize but somehow understood. They were explaining something important, about growing, about changing, about making space for what was coming. I stepped through. The room was the same size it had always been, but I was different now. Smaller, compressed. The door frame had grown to accommodate something else, something that needed more space than a human form could provide. I tried to step back, but the frame had sealed itself behind me. The wood was smooth now, seamless, like it had never been a doorway at all. I pressed my palms against the wall where the opening used to be. The surface was warm, pulse still beating just beneath the surface. From this side I could hear new sounds, footsteps in the house, a voice calling my name. Someone else had found the growing frame. I wanted to warn them, to explain what I had learned about doorways and the things that reshaped themselves to let other things through. But my voice made different sounds now, whispers that carried through wood and stone, inviting and hungry. The door frame was growing again. I could feel it stretching, reaching, making room for another guest. And I understood, finally, what it meant to be home. Story 3, not dust, not mildew, rich, damp earth. It hit me the moment I opened the door like I'd stepped into a graveyard after rain. I don't keep anything organic in there, just coats and boxes. But the scent was overwhelming, thick enough to taste. I pulled everything out, dug through every shelf. Nothing. But at the bottom, under the floorboard, I found a layer of fresh, black dirt. And in the center, a single shoe, not mine, still warm. I knelt beside the opening, my fingertips brushing against the soil. It was soft, recently disturbed, like someone had been digging. The warmth from the shoe still lingered against my palm, body heat unmistakable. I lifted it carefully, studying the worn leather, the frayed laces. A woman's shoe, size 7. The sole was caked with the same dark earth that filled the space beneath my floorboards. My apartment sits on the 3rd floor. There's no basement beneath me, no garden, no explanation for dirt to be here. I've lived in this place for 3 years and I've never seen this shoe before, but somehow it felt familiar, like a memory I couldn't quite grasp. I set the shoe aside and scooped up some of the soil, letting it run between my fingers. It was cold now, despite the warmth it had radiated moments before. Tiny white fragments caught my eye, not rocks, not debris. They looked like pieces of bone, small and chalky. I dropped the dirt immediately, wiping my hands on my jeans, but the earthy scent clung to my skin. That evening I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving in the walls, not scurrying like mice or insects, but a slow, deliberate shifting. I pressed my ear against the bedroom wall and heard it, a soft scraping, like fingernails dragging across wood. It came from inside the closet. I opened the door again. The dirt was still there, but now it seemed deeper, as if someone had been digging while I was away. The smell hit me harder this time, mixed with something else, something metallic and sweet. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, directing the beam into the hole. More shoes, 3 of them now arranged in a neat line. Different sizes, different styles, all of them warm to the touch. I started taking pictures, documenting everything. The dirt, the shoes, the strange fragments scattered throughout the soil. In one photo, I caught something that made my blood freeze. A reflection in the closet mirror, not my own, but someone else's face, pale and gaunt, staring back at me from behind my shoulder. When I spun around, nothing was there. I called the landlord. He seemed confused, almost irritated. He insisted there was no basement, no crawl space, no reason for dirt to be accumulating in my apartment. He suggested I might have a plumbing leak, but the soil wasn't muddy. It was dry, packed like cemetery earth. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door, written in my own handwriting, though I had no memory of writing it. They're waiting for you to dig deeper. I crumpled the note and threw it away, but the words echoed in my mind. Who was waiting? And why did my own handwriting feel foreign to me, like seeing a stranger's face in the mirror? That night I couldn't sleep. The scraping sounds grew louder, more insistent. I grabbed a small gardening spade from my kitchen drawer and returned to the closet. The hole had expanded again, and now I could see the faint outline of something buried deeper in the earth, something large and rectangular. I started digging. The soil was soft, yielding as if it wanted to be disturbed. My hands moved automatically, scooping and pushing until I felt something hard beneath my fingertips. Wood, smooth and polished. I cleared away more dirt, revealing the corner of what looked like a wooden box. The scraping sounds stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any noise, thick and expectant, like the moment before a scream. I could feel something watching me, waiting for me to uncover whatever lay buried beneath my floor. I pulled away more soil, revealing more of the box. It was beautiful, crafted from dark wood with intricate carvings along the edges. But as I brushed away the remaining dirt, I noticed something that made my hands tremble. The initials carved into the lid matched my own. I lifted the box carefully. It was heavier than I expected and warm, not just warm, but pulsing with a gentle heat like a sleeping animal. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, were dozens of photographs, all of me but not me. The person in the pictures looked exactly like me, but the expressions were wrong, too knowing, too satisfied. And in every photo, I was standing in the same closet, holding different shoes, smiling at the camera with eyes that didn't belong to me. At the bottom of the box, beneath the photographs, I found a journal. The handwriting was mine, but the words were foreign. Entry after entry describing people I'd never met, places I'd never been, things I'd never done. The final entry was dated yesterday, written in my careful script. The collection is almost complete, just one more pair. I looked down at my feet. I was wearing my favorite sneakers, the ones I'd bought last month. But now, staring at them, I realized I couldn't remember purchasing them. I couldn't remember putting them on. They felt foreign on my feet, like borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. The hole in my closet floor was still there, but now it looked different, deeper, more purposeful, like a grave that had been carefully prepared, waiting for its final occupant. And I understood with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins that I had been digging my own burial place. I tried to step back to leave the closet, but my feet wouldn't move. The sneakers felt heavy, rooted to the floor. I looked down and saw thin tendrils of dirt creeping up from the hole, wrapping around my ankles like gentle fingers. The soil was warm now, welcoming, and I could smell that earthy scent growing stronger, more intoxicating. My reflection in the closet mirror was smiling, but I wasn't. My hands were reaching for my shoes, untying the laces, but I wasn't controlling them. And somewhere in the space between what I was doing and what I wanted to do, I heard a voice, my own voice, whispering, "Welcome home." I wake up every morning in my bed, and every morning I check the closet. The hole is still there, but now it's empty, clean, waiting. And on my feet, I'm wearing shoes I don't remember buying, shoes that feel warm and familiar and wrong. Sometimes, late at night, I hear that scraping sound again, but now I know what it is. It's me digging, getting ready for the next pair. And I can't stop myself from wondering whose shoes they'll be and whether they'll still be warm when I find them. Story 4, they were always locked, always shut. But some nights the curtains fluttered with no breeze. The air would shift, colder, stiller, as if the outside was pushing in. One morning I found small marks on the windowsill, scratches, smudges, like someone had leaned in and watched from the wrong side. I cleaned them. They returned. I moved out. Still, every night since, I wake up to find the curtains open, wherever I am. The apartment came furnished with heavy drapes that hung like dead skin across every window. The fabric felt rough between my fingers, almost organic, as if it had absorbed years of exhaled breath and whispered secrets. When I first moved in, I tested every lock, every latch. The windows were sealed tight, painted shut by decades of careless maintenance. I remember feeling secure in that imprisonment. The first night I woke to a sound I couldn't identify, not quite scratching, not quite tapping, more like fingernails drawing slow circles against glass. I lay still, listening to my heartbeat drum against the pillow, waiting for the sound to repeat. Silence stretched until my ears began to ring. I told myself it was the building settling, pipes expanding, the usual symphony of old construction. But the next morning, the curtains in my bedroom hung differently, not open but askew, as if someone had brushed against them in passing. I smoothed them back into place, running my palm along the fabric. It felt warm, almost feverish, despite the chill that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored, the way dust motes seemed to dance in unnatural patterns near the windows, how the room temperature dropped several degrees whenever I approached the glass, the faint outline of what looked like handprints on the exterior surface, visible only when condensation formed in the early morning hours. I bought a small recorder, the kind journalists use for interviews. Every night I placed it on the windowsill before sleep. The first few recordings captured nothing but the ambient hum of the building's heating system and distant traffic. But on the fourth night, something changed. Buried beneath layers of white noise, I heard it. A voice so distorted it sounded like it was filtering through water, speaking words I couldn't quite understand. The rhythm was wrong, too slow, as if whoever was speaking had forgotten how human speech was supposed to flow. I played the recording dozens of times, adjusting the volume, trying to isolate the words. The more I listened, the more my skin began to crawl. I decided to document everything. I started a journal, noting every anomaly, every shift in temperature, every time I found those mysterious marks on the windowsill. The marks themselves were becoming more defined, more deliberate. What had started as simple smudges now looked almost like symbols, curved lines that seemed to writhe when I wasn't looking directly at them. The building's superintendent, a tired man with paint-stained fingers, claimed he'd never seen marks like these before. He suggested I was probably seeing things that new tenants often experienced adjustment anxiety. But when he touched the windowsill, he pulled his hand back quickly, as if the surface had burned him. I began sleeping in the living room as far from the bedroom window as possible, but the phenomena followed me. The curtains in every room started behaving strangely, swaying without cause, bunching up in corners as if trying to hide from something. The temperature fluctuations spread throughout the apartment, creating pockets of cold that would make my breath visible even when the thermostat read normal. One night I woke to find every curtain in the apartment pulled back, despite having closed them all before bed. The windows remained locked, but the glass was fogged with condensation that formed patterns too deliberate to be natural. Spirals within spirals, connecting lines that looked almost like a map of something I couldn't recognize. I pressed my face against the cool glass, trying to see what might be on the other side. The parking lot below looked normal street lights casting their usual orange glow across empty asphalt, but in the reflection I saw something that made my blood freeze. Behind me in the apartment stood a figure I didn't recognize. Tall, unnaturally thin, with features that seemed to shift and blur whenever I tried to focus on them. I spun around, but the apartment was empty. Just my furniture, my belongings, the oppressive weight of those heavy curtains. But the sensation of being watched remained, crawling across my skin like invisible insects. The recordings became more frequent, the voice clearer. It spoke my name now, or something close to it. The syllables stretched and distorted until they sounded like a song played at the wrong speed. I stopped sleeping entirely, spending my nights sitting in the center of the living room, watching the windows, waiting for something to happen. The breaking point came when I realized the marks on the windowsill weren't just appearing overnight. They were growing, spreading like some kind of infection across the wood, and they were warm to the touch, pulsing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I packed everything I owned in a single afternoon. The moving truck couldn't come fast enough. As I loaded the last box, I turned back to look at the apartment one final time. Every window was dark, every curtain drawn tight, but in the bedroom window I could swear I saw movement, a shadow passing back and forth as if someone was pacing. The new place was different, modern, clean, with windows that opened easily and let in plenty of natural light. For the first few nights I slept peacefully, convinced I'd left whatever was happening behind me. But then I woke to find the curtains open again, and I knew with absolute certainty that distance meant nothing. The marks appeared on the new windowsill within a week. The voice returned to my recordings, clearer now, more insistent. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection in the glass, I see that same tall figure standing behind me, growing more solid with each passing night. I've stopped trying to run. The windows are everywhere, and whatever wants in has been patient, methodical, learning how to cross the threshold between its world and mine. The curtains open themselves now, and I've learned to sleep with my back to the glass, because seeing what's out there is worse than not knowing. But every morning I find new marks, new symbols, new evidence that the boundary between inside and outside is dissolving. And I understand now that the windows were never meant to keep something out. They were meant to let something in, something that has been waiting a very long time to finally come home. Story 5, I don't read much and I never bought them, but one by one strange books started appearing on my shelves. No titles on the spines, just thick, heavy volumes filled with sketches of buildings I've never seen and faces I wish I hadn't. Some pages are glued shut. Others are written in a language I don't recognize but feel like I've spoken in dreams. I tried throwing them out. The next morning they were back, closer to my bed. The first thing I noticed wasn't the books themselves, but the smell. That dusty, organic scent that clings to old paper, mixed with something else I couldn't identify. Something metallic and warm, like copper left in sunlight. It filled my apartment every morning when I woke up, stronger near the bookshelf that had been empty when I moved in. I convinced myself someone was playing a prank. Maybe my landlord had a spare key and was slowly moving items from another tenant's storage. But the books felt ancient, their leather covers worn smooth by countless hands. The binding cracked when I opened them, releasing that smell in concentrated bursts that made my eyes water. The sketches inside were detailed beyond anything I'd ever seen. Architectural drawings of buildings with impossible angles, structures that seemed to fold in on themselves. The faces were worse. Men and women with expressions I couldn't read, their eyes following me as I turned each page. Some had features that didn't quite fit together properly, as if someone had drawn them from memory and gotten the proportions wrong. I started photographing each book before throwing them away, documenting their appearance as evidence. But the photos came out blurred, the images distorted as if something was interfering with the camera. The faces in the sketches looked different in the pictures, their expressions shifted slightly, more alert somehow. The locked pages bothered me most. Someone had deliberately sealed sections with what looked like wax or glue, creating barriers I couldn't breach without destroying the books entirely. I tried steaming one open, but the pages underneath were blank, completely white except for a faint outline that might have been a door or window. When I threw them in the dumpster behind my building, I made sure to bury them deep under other trash. I even walked around the block afterward, checking to see if anyone was watching, waiting to retrieve them. But my apartment was on the 3rd floor, and the only way up was through a locked entrance that required a key card. The next morning, 5 books sat on my shelf instead of 3. The new ones were smaller, bound in what looked like snake skin, with pages that felt warm to the touch. The writing inside was different too, more flowing, like cursive written by someone whose hands were shaking. I could almost read it, the letters swimming at the edge of comprehension before slipping away. I stopped leaving my apartment except for work. I needed to understand the pattern to catch whoever was doing this in the act. I set up a camera pointed at the bookshelf, but every morning the memory card was empty, completely wiped clean. The books multiplied anyway, spreading across the shelf like some kind of infection. The faces in the sketches began to look familiar, not like people I knew, but like people I should know, as if I'd seen them in peripheral vision or half-remembered dreams. One woman appeared in multiple books, her expression growing more concerned with each appearance. In the latest sketch, she was pointing at something outside the frame, her mouth open as if shouting a warning. I tried sleeping in different rooms, thinking that distance might break whatever was happening. But the books followed me, appearing on surfaces throughout the apartment. Kitchen counters, bathroom shelves, even inside the refrigerator, their pages somehow unaffected by the cold. The smell was changing too, becoming more complex. Under the paper and metal, I detected something organic and alive, like soil after rain or the inside of a greenhouse. Sometimes I caught traces of other scents, perfume, tobacco, coffee, as if the books were absorbing the essence of people who had handled them. I started talking to the books, asking them questions, demanding answers. My voice echoed strangely in the apartment, as if the walls had grown thicker. The books never responded, but their pages rustled when I wasn't looking directly at them, a sound like whispered conversations in a language I couldn't understand. The breaking point came when I found a book lying open on my pillow. The left page showed a detailed sketch of my apartment, viewed from above as if someone was looking down through the ceiling. Every detail was perfect: the furniture placement, the clothes draped over chairs, even the coffee mug I'd left on the counter. But the right page showed the same apartment with one difference: a figure lying in the bed, covers pulled over their head. I hadn't been sleeping well, but I knew I hadn't been in bed when I found the book. I was standing in the kitchen, making coffee, when I heard pages turning in the bedroom. By the time I investigated, the book was there, open to those specific pages, the sketch still wet as if the ink hadn't dried. I grabbed every book I could find and threw them out the window. They scattered across the pavement below, their pages fluttering like injured birds. I watched from above as people walked past them, stepping over and around them without seeming to notice. Even the maintenance crew that cleaned the courtyard swept around them as if they weren't there. But when I turned back to my apartment, the bookshelf was full again. More books than before, stacked in neat rows that reached the ceiling. The smell was overwhelming now, so thick I could taste it. And for the first time, I could hear something else, a sound like breathing, coming from inside the books themselves. I don't leave my apartment anymore. The books have spread to every surface, and I've stopped counting them. The sketches are changing daily now, the faces becoming more animated, more aware. They watch me move through the rooms, their eyes tracking my movements across the pages. Sometimes I think I understand what they want. In the margins of the newer books, I've found what look like instructions, written in that same flowing script. The words seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them, but I've begun to grasp their meaning. They're not trying to communicate with me. They're trying to replace me. The last sketch I found showed my apartment from the outside, windows glowing warmly in the darkness. But the figure visible in the window wasn't me. It was someone else, someone whose face I'd seen in dozens of books, wearing my clothes and living my life. And in the corner of the page, barely visible, was a small notation that looked like a date, written in my own handwriting. I haven't looked at that book since, but I can hear it calling to me from across the room. The pages are turning by themselves now, and I know that when I finally look again, the date will be closer. The books weren't mine, but they're making me theirs, one page at a time. Story 6. First it was the ceiling, tiny brown spots like water damage, but they changed shape each night, inching slowly across the surface. I thought I was imagining things until one morning they'd formed something unmistakable. An eye, perfectly round, staring down. Then it blinked. I painted over it. The stains came back, spreading faster, crawling down the walls toward the floor. I think they're trying to reach me. The apartment had been perfect when I moved in. Clean white walls, fresh paint, that new construction smell still lingering in the corners. The landlord had been eager to rent, mentioned something about the previous tenant leaving suddenly, but I didn't think much of it. Everyone has their reasons for moving. The first stain appeared on a Wednesday, a small brown circle, no bigger than a coin, right above my bed. I made a mental note to call the landlord about potential water damage from the unit above, but when I woke up Thursday morning, it had stretched into an oval. Not grown, stretched, like something had pulled it from both sides while I slept. I stood on my bed, reaching up to touch the spot. The paint felt normal, dry, no signs of moisture, but there was something else. A faint vibration, barely perceptible, like a distant heartbeat pulsing through the plaster. I pulled my hand back quickly. By Friday, 3 more spots had appeared. They weren't random, they formed a triangle around the original stain, perfectly spaced, too geometric to be natural water damage. I took pictures with my phone, documenting each one with detailed measurements. The original stain had grown again, now resembling a teardrop pointing toward the window. I called the landlord, left a message about the water damage. He never called back. The weekend brought rain, and I expected the stains to worsen. Instead, they darkened. The brown turned deep amber, almost translucent, and if I stared long enough, I could swear I saw movement beneath the surface, like something swimming in shallow water. I bought a step ladder and spent Sunday afternoon scraping at the stains with a putty knife. The paint came off in long, wet strips, even though it should have been dry. Underneath, the drywall was pristine white, no water damage, no discoloration, nothing, but the scraping left me with an overwhelming sense of being watched. That night, I set up my phone to record the ceiling while I slept. The footage showed nothing for hours, just the steady glow of the streetlight filtering through my curtains. But around what must have been the deepest part of the night, the stains began to move. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they crept across the surface like spilled coffee, finding its way to the edge of a table. In the morning, they had formed a perfect circle above my bed, and in the center of that circle, clear as day, was an eye. Not painted, not stained, an actual eye, complete with iris and pupil, blinking down at me with lazy, deliberate movements. I didn't go to work that day. I stood in my kitchen, staring up at the ceiling, waiting for someone to tell me I was losing my mind. The eye followed me as I moved around the room. When I waved, it blinked twice, as if acknowledging me. I painted over it with 3 coats of white paint, the thick kind that's supposed to cover anything. The brush made wet, squelching sounds as it moved across the surface, and the paint seemed to resist, as if something underneath was pushing back. But I persisted, covering every inch of the stained area until the ceiling was uniformly white again. The stains were back before the paint had dried. This time they covered nearly half the ceiling, a sprawling constellation of brown spots that moved even as I watched. They pulsed in rhythm, expanding and contracting like breathing. The eye in the center had grown larger, more detailed. I could see the tiny blood vessels in the white, the way the pupil dilated when I turned on the lights. I started sleeping on the couch, but the stains followed me. They appeared on the living room ceiling, then the bathroom, then the kitchen, always above me, always watching. I tried staying in different rooms, but by morning, new eyes would have opened wherever I'd spent the night. The smell came next, sweet and organic, like flowers left too long in water. It grew stronger near the stains, and when I breathed it in, I felt dizzy, disoriented. My vision would blur, and for just a moment I could swear I saw the room from above, looking down at myself from the ceiling. I bought a UV light, thinking maybe the stains were some kind of mold or bacteria that would fluoresce. Under the purple glow, they lit up like stars, but they also revealed something else. Lines connecting each stain, invisible in normal light, forming an intricate network across my ceiling. A map of some kind, or maybe a diagram. At the center of it all, the original eye pulsed brighter than the rest. I traced the lines with my finger, following the pattern. It led to the wall where new stains had begun to appear. Small ones at first, just drops scattered across the white paint. But as I watched, they began to move, sliding down the wall like tears, leaving dark trails behind them. The apartment grew cold, not the kind of cold that comes from poor insulation, but something deeper, more personal. The kind of cold that starts in your chest and spreads outward until your fingers won't work properly and your breath comes in short, sharp bursts. I tried to leave, packed a bag, and headed for the door. But as I reached for the handle, something made me look back. The stains had moved again, covering the walls now, flowing across the surfaces like water. They formed words spelled out in brown wetness, "Don't go." I stayed. The stains reached the floor that night. I felt them before I saw them, a creeping dampness that soaked through my socks and made the hardwood feel soft and spongy. They spread from the walls in long tendrils, reaching toward the couch where I huddled under blankets that offered no warmth. When they touched my feet, I felt it, a connection, electric and immediate. Suddenly, I wasn't alone in my thoughts. Something else was there, vast and patient and terribly, terribly old. It had been waiting in the walls, in the spaces between the drywall and the paint, growing stronger with each passing night. It wanted to show me things. Images flashed through my mind, other apartments, other tenants, other people who had noticed the stains and tried to fight them. They were all still here, somehow absorbed into the walls, their consciousness scattered across the network of brown lines that now covered every surface. I understood then why the previous tenant had left suddenly. They hadn't left at all. The stains cover everything now. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, all of it marked with that same brown wetness that pulses and moves and watches. I've stopped trying to paint over them. What's the point? They always come back, stronger than before. Sometimes I can hear the others, the ones who came before me. They whisper from inside the walls, sharing memories of sunlight and fresh air and the feeling of being alone in your own head. They tell me it's not so bad once you stop fighting it, once you accept that you're part of something larger now. The eye above my bed has grown enormous, taking up most of the ceiling. It blinks less frequently now, but when it does, I feel myself blink too. My movements are becoming less my own, more synchronized with the rhythm of the stains. I've started documenting everything, writing it all down while I still can. Maybe someone will find these notes, maybe they'll understand what happened here. Maybe they'll be smarter than I was and leave before the stains notice them. But I doubt it. The stains are patient. They know how to wait. They know how to make you think you're imagining things, right up until the moment you realize you're not alone anymore. The brown wetness is creeping up my legs now, seeping through my skin. It doesn't hurt. It feels like coming home after a long journey, like finding a place where you finally belong. The others are welcoming me, their voices growing clearer as I join them in the walls. I can see the whole pattern now, the network that connects everything. It's beautiful in its way. A living map of consciousness spreading through the building, reaching into other apartments, other lives. Soon there will be more of us, and we'll be able to reach further, touch more people, bring them into the warmth of our shared existence. The eye is closing now, not blinking, closing for good, but I don't need it anymore. I can see through all the stains now, through every drop of brown wetness that marks our territory. The apartment is ours, and soon so much more will be. I'm writing this with hands that barely feel like mine anymore, fingers that move in harmony with something vast and patient and kind. If you're reading this, if you found your way here, then you've probably already noticed the stains, those tiny brown spots that weren't there yesterday. Don't fight them. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to bring you home. Story 7, not my voice but my words. I'd think something, a memory, a fear, and the TV would whisper it back in static. At first I blamed stress, hallucination, but then it began finishing my thoughts before I could. It commented on things I hadn't told anyone, the worst things. I tried unplugging it. It still glowed at night. No image, just a voice, always calm, always waiting. The apartment came furnished, which should have been my first warning. The previous tenant had left everything behind, dishes still in the sink, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, and that television mounted on the wall like a black mirror reflecting nothing but my own uncertainty. The landlord mentioned the tenant had moved out suddenly, something about a family emergency, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine when he said it. I noticed the humming first, not the usual electronic drone of aging appliances, but something deeper, more rhythmic, like breathing. It started on my third night there, seeping through the walls just as I was drifting off to sleep. I pressed my ear to the plaster, trying to locate the source, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The smell followed the next evening, sweet and cloying like flowers left too long in stagnant water. It would appear without warning, strongest near the television, then fade before I could identify it completely. I checked the vents, searched for dead insects, even called maintenance about a possible gas leak. They found nothing. The technician looked at me with that particular expression people reserve for the paranoid and the unhinged. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything. The humming lasted exactly as long as I held my breath. The floral scent intensified whenever I thought about my mother's funeral, though I tried not to make that connection. The television screen, even when off, seemed to gather light from impossible angles, creating reflections that didn't quite match the room's geometry. On the 7th night, I woke to find every surface in the apartment covered with a thin film of moisture, not condensation, something else. The droplets felt warm against my fingertips, almost viscous. They smelled like copper and rain. I wiped them away with towels, but by morning they had returned, heavier now, dripping from the ceiling in lazy patterns that reminded me of tears. I began sleeping with my phone's voice recorder running. The first few nights yielded nothing but my own restless breathing and the building's settling groans, but then I caught something else. A whisper so faint it might have been wind through cracked windows. I played it back over and over, adjusting the volume until I could make out words. She never forgave you. My mother's voice, though she'd been dead for 2 years. The television remained off. I had checked. The plug lay coiled on the floor where I'd left it, 3 feet from the nearest outlet. Yet somehow impossibly her voice had emerged from those dark speakers, speaking truths I'd never admitted to anyone. The guilt I carried about missing her final call, the relief I'd felt when her suffering ended, the way I'd smiled at her funeral, not from joy, but from a nervous habit I couldn't control. I called the landlord again, demanding answers about the previous tenant. This time, his reluctance cracked. The man had been found wandering the streets, claiming his television was reading his mind. He'd been committed to a psychiatric facility where he remained, drawing endless pictures of screens with eyes instead of images. That night, I covered the television with a thick blanket. The humming stopped immediately, replaced by something worse, complete silence. The kind of quiet that pressed against your eardrums until you wanted to scream just to break it. I lay in bed, listening to my own heartbeat when the voice returned. "You're thinking about the pills." I sat up so fast my vision blurred. The blanket remained in place, but somehow the voice had come through it, clearer now, more insistent. It was right, of course. I had been thinking about the sleeping pills in my bathroom cabinet, wondering if taking 3 instead of 1 would grant me a full night's rest. "You're thinking about the knife." I wasn't. I had been thinking about the knife in my kitchen drawer, the one I'd used to cut the rope when I'd found her. The same knife I'd held afterward, feeling its weight, understanding for the first time why some people chose to leave. The voice knew things it shouldn't know. It spoke my thoughts back to me with perfect clarity, but somehow always a second ahead of my conscious mind. It knew about the letters I'd hidden in my desk drawer, the ones I'd written but never sent, confessing everything I'd done wrong. It knew about the videos on my laptop, the ones I'd never shown to anyone, the ones that proved I wasn't the person others thought I was. I tried sleeping in the bathroom, but the voice followed me there too. It whispered through the exhaust fan, the pipes, the mirror. It told me about the scars on my wrists, the ones I'd explained away as accidents. It recounted conversations I'd had with myself in the dark, plans I'd made and abandoned, promises I'd broken to the dead. The television began turning itself on, not the warm glow of a normal screen, but something else, a presence. The static formed patterns that hurt to look at directly, shapes that seemed to shift and writhe when I wasn't focusing on them. Sometimes I caught glimpses of movement in the grain, faces, hands, eyes that tracked my movements across the room. I stopped leaving the apartment. Food delivery drivers left packages by the door without knocking, as if they sensed something wrong. The building's other residents avoided me in the hallways, their faces creasing with unconscious revulsion. Even the maintenance requests I submitted went unanswered, as if I'd become invisible to everyone except the voice. The voice that knew everything. It described my dreams before I'd had them. It quoted conversations I'd have with myself the following day. It told me what I'd eat for breakfast, what I'd think about while showering, what I'd remember lying awake in the dark. It had mapped the inside of my head completely, claimed every thought as its own. I tried to fight it. I screamed at the television, threw books at the covered screen, even attempted to smash it with a hammer. But the hammer felt wrong in my hands, too heavy, as if the air itself had thickened around it. The voice only laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and told me about the time I'd tried to burn down my childhood home. Another thing I'd never told anyone. The final night, I woke to find the blanket folded neatly on the floor. The television screen showed my own face, but wrong somehow. The features were mine, but the expression belonged to someone else, something else. The image moved independently, smiling when I frowned, closing its eyes when I stared. The voice spoke one last time, but now it came from my own mouth, my own throat, my own thoughts given sound without my permission. You're thinking about telling someone. I had been composing messages to friends, explanations to family, warnings to anyone who might listen. But as the words formed in my mind, they emerged from the speakers instead, broadcast into the room like a confession I never intended to make. The television went dark, the humming stopped, the sweet smell faded. But the voice remained, nested somewhere deep in my skull, commenting on everything I saw, everything I felt, everything I tried to think in private. It had found its way inside, and now it lived there, a permanent resident in the space I'd once called my own. I still live in the apartment. The television stays on now, displaying nothing but static, but I've learned not to look directly at it. The new tenants who inquire about the place next door always ask about the previous occupant, the one who left so suddenly. I tell them about a family emergency, and my eyes never meet theirs when I say it. Sometimes, when I'm feeling generous, I mention the humming, just to see if they're listening. Most of them aren't. They're too busy thinking about their own secrets, their own guilt, their own private darkness. The voice tells me all about it. Story 8, I don't have a mailbox down there. No one should know that part of the house even exists, but I began finding envelopes on the basement stairs, neatly placed, always sealed. Inside, photos of my kitchen, my bed, me. One photo showed a view from above, like someone was standing over me as I slept. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. The notes were unsigned, but the last one read, "Almost ready." The basement had always been my refuge. The concrete walls absorbed sound so completely that I could barely hear my own breathing. The air down there held a particular coolness, the kind that made your skin tighten and your breath shallow. When I descended those wooden steps, each creak felt like a conversation between the house and my weight. The first envelope appeared on a Tuesday, white crisp with my address written in careful block letters, but instead of my name it simply said basement resident. I stood there holding it, feeling the texture of expensive paper between my fingers. The adhesive had been applied with precision, no wrinkles or bubbles. Someone had taken great care with this. Inside, a single photograph, my kitchen table taken from the window. The angle was perfect, centered, as if the photographer had spent considerable effort getting the composition right. I could see my coffee mug, still steaming, positioned exactly where I'd left it that morning. The timestamp on the back read yesterday's date. I checked every window, every lock, every possible entry point, everything secure. The photo had to be a mistake, perhaps meant for someone else, but the address was correct, down to the apartment number that didn't officially exist. The second envelope arrived 3 days later. This one contained a photograph of my bathroom mirror, but the reflection showed someone else's face. Not clearly, just the suggestion of features that weren't mine. The image quality was pristine, professional almost. I held it up to the light, examining every detail. The lighting in the photo matched exactly what I remembered from that morning when I'd brushed my teeth. I started keeping a journal, documenting each delivery. The envelopes always appeared while I was out, always in the same spot on the third step from the bottom. The paper consistently smelled of smoke, not cigarettes, but something deeper. Wood smoke, maybe, or the residue from a fireplace that had been burning for days. The photographs became more intimate. My bed unmade with the sheets twisted exactly as I'd left them. My desk with papers scattered in patterns I recognized. My refrigerator open, showing the exact contents I'd seen that morning. Each image captured moments from my private life with uncomfortable accuracy. I began leaving my own messages, small pieces of paper tucked into corners where the photographer might find them. "Who are you?" I wrote. "What do you want?" The messages disappeared, but no replies came, only more photographs. The quality of the images started changing. The edges became softer, dreamlike. Colors shifted subtly, as if the photographs were developing differently than they should. My kitchen appeared warmer in the photos than it felt in reality. My bedroom looked larger, the shadows deeper and more welcoming. I installed a camera in the basement, pointing it directly at the stairs. The first few days showed nothing unusual. Then the footage began glitching. Small gaps appeared in the recording, never more than a few seconds, but always coinciding with the delivery of new envelopes. The gaps felt intentional, precisely timed. One photograph showed my journal, open to the page where I'd written about the mysterious deliveries. But the handwriting looked different, neater, as if someone had rewritten my words with more care. The content was identical, but the presentation was improved, more legible, more thoughtful. The basement started feeling different. The temperature fluctuated without reason. Some days the concrete walls felt warm to the touch, almost alive. Other days they were so cold that moisture formed beneath my palms. The air circulation changed too, sometimes flowing in patterns that didn't match the ventilation system. I began spending more time down there waiting. The silence was no longer complete. Subtle sounds emerged, the whisper of paper against paper, the soft tap of footsteps that might have been my own heartbeat, the gentle hum of electronics that I couldn't locate. The most disturbing photograph arrived on a Thursday. It showed me sleeping, taken from directly above my bed. The angle was impossible unless someone had been suspended from the ceiling, but more unsettling was my expression. I looked peaceful, more relaxed than I'd felt in months. The version of me in the photograph seemed to be enjoying a deeper sleep than I could remember experiencing. I started staying awake, monitoring the basement throughout the night. The stairs never creaked, no shadows moved, but each morning brought a new envelope. The deliveries continued with mechanical precision, unaffected by my vigilance. The final photograph changed everything. It showed the basement itself, but not as I knew it. The space looked larger, more finished. The concrete walls appeared painted warm colors that made the room feel welcoming rather than stark. Furniture that I didn't own filled the space. A comfortable chair, a small table, bookshelves lined with volumes I couldn't identify. But most disturbing was the figure in the photograph. Someone was sitting in the chair, reading. The person's face was obscured by the book, but their posture was familiar. They wore my clothes, had my build, but something about their presence felt more settled, more at home in that transformed space. I compared the photograph to my actual basement. The dimensions matched perfectly, but the reality felt temporary, unfinished. The photograph suggested a potential, a version of the space that could exist with the right attention and care. The last envelope contained no photograph. Instead, a single sheet of paper with 2 words, almost ready. I touched the basement walls that night, feeling for changes I couldn't see. The concrete seemed softer, more yielding. When I pressed my ear against the surface, I could hear something that might have been breathing, or perhaps just the house settling in ways it never had before. The envelope stopped coming, but the basement continued changing. Each day brought subtle modifications, better lighting that I couldn't trace to any source, improved acoustics that made even whispers carry with perfect clarity, a warmth that seemed to radiate from the walls themselves. I still sleep upstairs, but I spend most of my waking hours in the basement now. The space feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. Sometimes I catch myself arranging things differently, positioning my chair to match the angle from that final photograph, organizing my books in ways that seem more intentional than random. The photographs were never about invasion or threat. They were about possibility, about showing me what could be. The basement is becoming the place it was always meant to be, and I am becoming the person who belongs there. But I still don't know who was taking the photographs or why they stopped. Sometimes I leave my own camera running, hoping to capture evidence of the transformation. The footage shows nothing unusual, just me, moving through a space that feels more complete each day. The question that haunts me isn't who was watching, but why they wanted me to know, and whether the transformation is finished, or if I'm still becoming whatever they intended me to become. Story 9, they were uneven one morning, not cracked, just rearranged. The grout lines didn't match anymore. Patterns I hadn't noticed before began to emerge, spirals, runes, symbols etched in the discoloration. I scrubbed them clean. The next day they were back, deeper, sharper. I tried recording them with my phone, but the images came out blank. The The sound filed, though it wasn't static, it was whispering. The ceramic felt warm under my fingertips when I pressed against it, like skin after a fever breaks. The bathroom had always been the coldest room in the house, but now it held heat that seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. I ran my hands across the wall systematically, mapping each tile with methodical precision. Some vibrated, barely perceptible tremors that traveled through my palm and up my arm. Others remained still, cold islands in an ocean of warmth. The smell came next, sweet copper like pennies left in rain, mixed with something floral that reminded me of funeral homes. It lingered in the air even after I opened windows, turned on fans, scrubbed every surface with bleach until my eyes burned. The scent would fade during the day, but each morning it returned stronger, more cloying, as if something underneath was slowly decomposing. I started taking pictures obsessively. Wide shots, close-ups, different angles, and lighting conditions. My phone's memory filled with white rectangles, empty frames where the patterns should have been. But when I held the device near the wall, the screen would flicker with shadows that moved independently of any light source. I bought a digital camera, then a film camera, then hired a professional photographer who left after 10 minutes, claiming his equipment was malfunctioning. The whispers grew clearer. Not words in any language I recognized, but sounds that felt familiar, like conversations overheard in childhood dreams. They seemed to respond to my presence. When I leaned closer to the wall, they intensified. When I stepped back, they faded to barely audible sighs. I began recording everything, hours of audio files that played back as silence to everyone else, but filled my ears with urgent messages I couldn't decode. Sleep became impossible. The patterns were changing nightly, becoming more complex, more deliberate. I found myself standing in the bathroom at all hours, watching the tiles shift like a slow kaleidoscope. The symbols seemed to be telling a story, hieroglyphs of some personal mythology I was meant to understand. I traced them with my finger, memorizing their shapes, sketching them in notebook after notebook until my hand cramped and my vision blurred. The mirror began reflecting things incorrectly. My movements lagged behind my reflection by fractions of seconds. Sometimes my reflection would turn its head before I did, as if anticipating my actions. I covered it with a towel, but the distortions continued, the fabric rippling with shapes that pressed against it from the other side. I called contractors, plumbers, electricians. They found nothing wrong. The house was structurally sound, the plumbing perfect, the electrical system recently updated. One worker commented on how cold the bathroom was, running his hands along the walls I knew were warm. His tools detected no moisture, no electrical interference, no gas leaks. To everyone else, it was just a normal room. But I knew better. The patterns were accelerating, changing not just nightly but constantly. I could watch them shift in real time now, grout lines redrawing themselves, tiles sliding into new configurations like a puzzle solving itself. The whispers had become a constant murmur, a background noise that followed me throughout the house. The sweet copper smell clung to my clothes, my skin, my hair. I tried to document everything scientifically, temperature readings, sound measurements, time-lapse photography, but the data was worthless. The instruments showed normal readings while my senses screamed otherwise. Reality had become subjective, split between what I experienced and what could be proven. I was living in two versions of the same space, and only one of them was trying to tell me something. The breaking point came when I saw my own face in the patterns. Not clearly, more like a suggestion, a cluster of symbols that arranged themselves into features I recognized. My eyes, my mouth, my profile from angles I'd never seen. The tiles were creating a portrait of me, incorporating my image into their endless transformations. I was becoming part of whatever story they were telling. I tried to destroy the wall. Hammer, chisel, crowbar, every tool bounced off the surface as if it were made of steel. The tiles absorbed the impact, rippling like water, then reformed exactly as they had been. Worse, the patterns began appearing in other rooms. First faint outlines on the kitchen backsplash, then more obvious formations on the living room wallpaper. The house was becoming a canvas for the same incomprehensible narrative. Now I understand that escape isn't possible. The patterns have spread to every surface, every reflection, every shadow. They're not just in the house, they're in my vision, burned into my retinas like staring too long at the sun. When I close my eyes, I see them pulsing behind my lids. When I look at blank walls, they emerge from the paint like developing photographs. The whispers never stop. They've become part of my inner voice, indistinguishable from my own thoughts. Sometimes I catch myself speaking in that unknown language, words flowing from my mouth without conscious decision. My reflection shows someone I barely recognize, hollow eyes, pallid skin, fingers stained with grout residue that never washes clean. The tiles still shift, every morning, every night, every moment I'm not watching, but now I know they're not just rearranging themselves, they're preparing for something. The patterns are becoming more urgent, more insistent. The whispers are growing louder, more demanding. Whatever story they're telling, it's approaching its conclusion. And I'm afraid I'm not just the audience, I'm the final chapter. Story 10, not a breeze, not footsteps, just a slow, deliberate ripple from top to bottom like something invisible brushed past. I tested every vent, sealed every gap. The fabric kept swaying, always between 2 and 3 ripples, never more. One night I sat motionless on the floor and waited. The curtains didn't move, but the doorknob behind me did. The movement started 3 weeks after I moved into the apartment. Heavy burgundy curtains that came with the place, thick enough to block out the harsh afternoon sun. I'd been grateful for them at first. The previous tenant had left them perfectly hung, professionally cleaned. They smelled faintly of lavender, which seemed odd for such dark fabric. The first ripple happened while I was reading, a peripheral disturbance that made me glance up, expecting to see a cat or a draft. Nothing, just the fabric settling back into stillness. I returned to my book, but the words blurred together. Something about the movement felt deliberate, purposeful. I started paying attention. The ripples always followed the same pattern, starting from the top hem, flowing downward like water over stone. Never random flutter, never the chaotic dance of fabric caught in air currents. Each wave took exactly the same amount of time to travel from ceiling to floor. My landlord suggested checking the heating system. I spent an afternoon with a maintenance worker, examining every vent, every gap in the walls. We found nothing. The air was perfectly still. I even bought one of those smoke pencils, the kind that reveals invisible drafts. The thin white stream rose straight up, undisturbed. Yet the curtains continued their slow dance. I began documenting everything. A notebook filled with observations. The ripples occurred most frequently during late afternoon, always in sets of 2 or 3, never when I was looking directly at them. They seemed to respond to my presence, or perhaps my attention. If I focused intently on the fabric, it would remain perfectly still. The moment my concentration wandered, the movement would begin again. The smell of lavender grew stronger. I started recording video, setting up my phone to capture the curtains while I worked elsewhere in the apartment. Hours of footage showed nothing but motionless fabric, but I could feel the movement happening just outside the frame of the camera's vision. The sensation was like being watched by something that always stayed one step ahead of direct observation. The recordings revealed something else. In the audio, beneath the ambient noise of the apartment, I could hear a faint rustling. Not the crisp sound of fabric moving, but something softer, more organic, like breathing through cloth. I played the recordings back at different speeds, adjusted the volume, filtered out background noise. The rustling became clearer, rhythmic, measured, almost like whispered words I couldn't quite understand. The sound occurred in perfect sync with the ripples I witnessed but couldn't capture. Sleep became difficult. I'd lie in bed, hyper-aware of every small sound, every shift in the apartment's atmosphere. The curtains faced away from the bedroom, but I could feel their movement through the walls. The ripples had developed their own rhythm, a pulse that seemed to match my heartbeat during moments of anxiety. I tried removing the curtains entirely. The moment I reached for the hanging rod, the fabric went completely still. not just motionless, dead. The difference was palpable. Without the movement, the apartment felt hollow, wrong. I left them hanging. The doorknob incident changed everything. I had positioned myself on the floor, back against the bedroom door, facing the curtains directly. No peripheral vision, no distractions. I would catch the movement this time, see exactly what caused it. For 2 hours, I maintained perfect focus. The curtains hung motionless, defeated by my attention. But behind me, metal shifted against metal. The doorknob turned slowly, deliberately, the same measured pace as the ripples. I felt the mechanism engage, heard the soft click of the latch disengaging. The door opened just enough to let in cool air from the hallway. I spun around, heart hammering. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no retreating figure. Just the door standing slightly ajar and the faint smell of lavender drifting from the bedroom beyond. When I turned back to the curtains, they were moving. Not the usual gentle ripples, but violent waves, as if something were running its hands along the fabric from behind. The movement was frantic, desperate, like a trapped animal testing the boundaries of its cage. I approached slowly, reached out to touch the fabric. It was warm, body temperature warm, with a texture that felt almost like skin beneath the weave. The lavender scent was overwhelming now, cloying and too sweet, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. My fingers found something else, a regular pattern of raised marks on the back of the fabric, not embroidery or texture from manufacturing, but something that felt deliberately placed. I traced the marks with my fingertips, recognizing the pattern gradually. They were letters pressed into the fabric from behind, spelling out words I couldn't quite read in the dim light. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and illuminated the back of the curtains. The letters were clear now, formed by some kind of pressure or heat that had altered the fabric's weave. A message written in desperate, uneven script. "I'm still here." The words repeated across the entire width of the fabric, dozens of times, overlapping and intertwining until they formed a tapestry of desperate communication. Some letters were darker, more defined, as if they had been written with greater urgency. Others were barely visible, fading into the fabric like half-remembered thoughts. The movement stopped completely. The curtains hung perfectly still, as if the message had been their only purpose. But now I could feel something else in the apartment, a presence that had been trying to communicate, using the only medium available to it. I spent the rest of the night reading the messages, finding new words hidden in the overlapping text. Names, dates, fragments of sentences that painted a picture of someone trapped, someone who had been trying to reach out through the only moving thing in their world. The next morning I called the landlord. The previous tenant, he said, had been found collapsed in the apartment, apparently from natural causes. A woman who had lived alone, no family, no visitors. She had been discovered 3 weeks after her death, the apartment sealed and undisturbed. 3 weeks, the same amount of time the curtains had been moving. I live with the curtains now, accepting their gentle communication. They still ripple in their measured pattern, but the movement feels different, less desperate, more conversational. Sometimes I sit on the floor and watch them, and I swear I can feel gratitude in their motion. The lavender smell has faded, replaced by something warmer, more familiar, like the scent of a person who has been waiting a very long time for someone to listen. But lately I've noticed something new. My own possessions have begun to move when I'm not looking directly at them. Books shift position on shelves, keys relocate themselves, papers flutter without any detectable air current. The apartment is teaching me its language, showing me how to exist in the space between seen and unseen. I wonder who will find me when my time comes. I wonder what message I'll leave in the fabric of this place, and whether they'll be patient enough to read it. The curtains move with no air, but they move with purpose, with memory, with the persistence of things that refuse to be forgotten. and now I'm learning to move with them. Story 11, the lights dimmed when I said things I didn't mean. The floor groaned when I denied what I'd done. I thought it was coincidence, but then the mirrors began to fog when I lied, only when I lied. I tried speaking only truth, silence. Then I whispered one single harmless falsehood. The pipes screamed. The house smelled of old wood and something metallic, like copper pennies left in rain. I had moved in 3 weeks ago, drawn by the low rent and the landlord's hurried eagerness to find a tenant. The previous owner had left suddenly, he said, family emergency. The walls still held the impressions of removed picture frames, ghostly rectangles of unfaded paint that seemed to watch me as I unpacked. I first noticed the correlation while on a phone call with my sister. She asked if I was eating well, and I said yes, though the refrigerator held only wilted lettuce and expired milk. The overhead light flickered twice, then steadied. When she asked if I missed home, I said no, though my chest ached with loneliness. The bulb dimmed to half its brightness, casting strange shadows across the kitchen walls. Coincidence, I told myself, old wiring. The house was built in the 50s, probably hadn't been updated since then, but the pattern persisted. Every untruth, every white lie, every careful omission seemed to trigger some response from the house itself. The floorboards would creak in specific sequences. The thermostat would drop degrees for no reason. The bathroom mirror would fog despite no hot water running. I began documenting everything. A notebook filled with observations, what I said, what really happened, how the house reacted. The lies grew more deliberate as I tested my theory. I told the mailman I was fine when I felt anxious. The front door's hinges shrieked like wounded animals. I assured a telemarketer I wasn't interested in their product when I actually was. The light in the hallway strobed 3 times, then went out completely. The house was listening, learning, responding. I tried speaking only truth for an entire day. The house remained still. No creaking, no dimming, no strange sounds, just the ordinary settling of old wood and the distant hum of electrical systems. But truth proved exhausting. Truth meant admitting I hadn't spoken to my parents in months because I resented their constant questions. Truth meant acknowledging that I'd moved here to escape the consequences of mistakes I'd made in my previous life. Truth meant confronting the reason I'd had to leave so suddenly. On the 4th day of my experiment, I cracked. A neighbor knocked, asking if I'd seen her cat. I hadn't, but I heard myself saying yes, I'd seen it just that morning heading toward the park. The lie slipped out before I could stop it. The water pipes throughout the house began to rattle, a sound like bones shaking in a metal coffin. The rattling grew louder, more violent, until I thought the pipes might burst. Then silence. The neighbor left satisfied. I stood in my hallway, heart pounding, realizing I'd crossed some invisible threshold. The house had been patient with my tests, my deliberate falsehoods, but this lie had been different. This lie had affected someone else, sent them searching for a pet that might be lost, hurt, or worse. The walls began to feel closer after that. The rooms seemed smaller, though I knew their dimensions hadn't changed. The air grew thick, oppressive, carrying that metallic scent more strongly. I measured the rooms obsessively, convinced they were shrinking, but the tape measure showed the same numbers every day. Yet my shoulders brushed door frames that had never touched me before. I started avoiding speech altogether. When the phone rang, I let it go to voicemail. When delivery drivers came, I accepted packages with nods and gestures. But the house seemed to sense my thoughts now, responding to lies I considered but didn't speak. The temperature would drop when I contemplated calling in sick to work when I felt fine. The lights would flicker when I thought about telling my sister I was happy. The mirrors were the worst. They fogged now even when I thought untrue things, creating patterns in the condensation that looked almost like words, like someone trying to write messages from the other side of the glass. I covered them with towels, but the fabric would grow damp in the same patterns, the house's responses bleeding through physical barriers. I tried to research the house's history, but my internet connection would cut out whenever I searched for previous owners or incidents. The library's computers would freeze when I looked up property records. It was as if the house was protecting its secrets, keeping me isolated with my growing understanding of its nature. The breaking point came when my sister called, worried because I hadn't returned her messages. She was driving over, she said, to check on me. I panicked, imagining her discovering my situation, thinking I'd lost my mind. When she arrived, I greeted her with a smile I didn't feel and assured her everything was perfect. I was thriving, I said, loving my independence, never been better. The house erupted, every light in the place strobed frantically. The floors shook beneath our feet, the walls groaned like a ship in a storm. But most terrible of all, the mirrors throughout the house began to crack, spiderweb fractures spreading across their surfaces with sharp, musical sounds like breaking wine glasses. My sister stared in horror as the cracks formed letters, words, sentences telling her exactly what I'd hidden. My loneliness, my regret, my fear, my desperate need for help. She left immediately, promising to call later, but I knew she wouldn't. The house had shown her the truth I couldn't speak, and that truth was too much for her to handle. The cracks in the mirrors remained, spelling out my failures in fractured glass. Now I sit in the growing darkness, afraid to turn on the lights because I know what they'll reveal. The house has learned to punish not just my lies but my truth as well. The mirrors show me things I don't want to see. The walls whisper secrets I never told anyone. The floors creak out the rhythm of my heartbeat, faster and faster as my anxiety builds. I understand now why the previous tenant left so quickly. The house doesn't just respond to lies, it feeds on them, grows stronger with each falsehood until it becomes something else entirely. Something that knows you better than you know yourself. Something that will never let you leave until you've told every truth you've ever hidden, faced every lie you've ever spoken. But some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. Some lies are all that keep us human. The house knows this too, and it's waiting. Story 12, I sleep alone. No one's been in my bed but me. But lately, when I lay down, the mattress dips in the middle. I feel pressure against my back, like someone curling up behind me. No warmth, no breath, just weight. One night, I stayed awake, completely still, and I felt fingers trace my spine. The first sign wasn't the dip, it was the smell. Lavender, heavy artificial lavender that shouldn't exist in my bedroom. I don't use fabric softener. I don't burn candles. The scent clings to my pillowcase each morning, sweet and cloying, like something trying too hard to mask another odor underneath. I strip the sheets daily now, wash them in scalding water. The smell returns by evening. My mattress is firm, memory foam. I bought it specifically because it doesn't sag, doesn't retain impressions, yet when I pull back the covers, there it is. A shallow depression running down the center, perfectly parallel to where I sleep. The indent is too precise, too deliberate, like someone has been lying there waiting. I photograph it, document the measurements. The depression is exactly my height, but narrower, more delicate. The foam springs back within minutes, erasing the evidence, but I have the pictures, proof that I'm not losing my mind. The pressure started 3 weeks ago. Subtle at first, a gentle settling of the mattress that I attributed to the building settling, the floors shifting. But buildings don't breathe, buildings don't sigh. I feel it now as I write this, the mattress responding to weight that isn't mine, the springs compressing in a pattern that matches the curve of a spine, the bend of knees. My back grows cold where the presence presses close, not the cold of air conditioning or open windows. The cold of something that has never been warm. I tried sleeping on the couch. The pressure followed me there. I tried the floor. It waited beneath me, patient as gravity. The touching began last week. Not rough, not threatening, exploratory. Fingertips trailing along my shoulder blade, following the ridge of my ribs. Sometimes a palm pressed flat against my hip. Always through my clothes, always gentle, always wrong. I installed a camera, infrared, motion activated. I watched the footage each morning, studying every frame. The mattress dips, the sheets wrinkle and fold, but there's nothing there, just empty space creating impressions, disturbing fabric, leaving the lingering scent of artificial flowers. The audio is worse than the visuals. Breathing that isn't mine, soft, rhythmic inhales and exhales recorded by the camera's microphone. The sound is clearest when I'm deepest in sleep, as if whatever shares my bed grows bolder when I'm most vulnerable. I've tried talking to it, whispering into the darkness, asking what it wants. The breathing stops, the pressure lifts, but only for a moment. Then it returns, closer than before, more insistent. My phone battery drains faster now. The screen flickers during the night, casting strange shadows on the ceiling. Sometimes I wake to find apps open that I didn't touch, the camera app, the voice recorder, as if something is trying to document me the way I document it. The mirror in my bedroom reflects things differently now. Not wrong exactly, just slightly off. My reflection appears normal, but the space behind me seems deeper, more layered. Sometimes I catch movement in the peripheral reflection, a shifting of sheets that doesn't match my own movements. I haven't slept properly in days. When I do drift off, I dream of being watched, of someone studying my habits, learning my patterns, memorizing the way I curl my legs, the position of my arms. In the dreams, I'm the one who's out of place, the intruder in my own bed. The pressure is strongest now when I'm awake. During the day, while I sit at my desk or stand in the kitchen, I feel it. The phantom weight of someone lying down, settling in, making themselves comfortable. It's claiming my space, hour by hour, inch by inch. I bought new sheets yesterday, pure white cotton. No patterns, no colors. This morning they were stained, not with anything visible. But when I hold them up to the light, I can see the impression of a body. A complete silhouette pressed into the fabric. The outline of someone smaller than me, more delicate, but unmistakably there. The stain doesn't wash out. I've started sleeping sitting up, back pressed against the headboard, legs drawn up, but the presence adapts. It curves around me now, spooning against my side, an arm draping across my waist. The mattress responds to every movement, every shift in position. Last night I felt breath on my neck, not warm breath, not cold breath, just the movement of air that shouldn't exist. A whisper that might have been my name, or might have been the sound of fabric against fabric. I'm writing this now because I need to record what's happening before it gets worse, before I start forgetting what normal feels like. The pressure is here as I type, sitting beside me on the bed, leaning against my shoulder, reading over my arm. I can feel curiosity in the way the mattress shifts, the way the sheets rustle. It's learning from my words, understanding my fear. I've stopped taking pictures. The camera captures nothing useful anymore, just empty beds and phantom impressions, but I know what I feel. The weight that shouldn't exist, the touch that leaves no trace. The scent is stronger now, not just lavender anymore, something underneath it, something organic and patient, something that's been waiting much longer than 3 weeks. I think it's been here all along, in the mattress, in the springs, in the memory foam that remembers everything, waiting for the right person to notice, to acknowledge, to stop sleeping alone. The breathing is synchronized with mine now. When I inhale, it inhales. When I hold my breath, it waits. We're learning each other's rhythms, finding a pattern that fits. I don't think I can leave anymore, not really. Because wherever I go, I'll carry the memory of this weight, this presence, the knowledge that beds are never truly empty, that sleep is never truly private. And tonight, when I finally give in to exhaustion, I know it will be waiting, settling in beside me, patient as gravity, gentle as a whisper, taking up space that was never mine to begin with. The mattress isn't empty, it never was. I'm just finally learning to share. Story 13. Every morning I wake to strips of wallpaper peeled upward, curled like dry skin. The wall underneath looks raw, like flesh, red, pulsing faintly. If I stare too long, I paste it back down. It peels again. One night I let it be. By morning the pattern had changed. It now formed a word. A single word I hadn't spoken aloud in years, and shouldn't have ever said. The apartment still smells like vanilla and coffee when I first notice it. Such ordinary scents, comforting even. But there's something else threading through the air, something metallic, like copper pennies left in rain. I press my nose closer to the wall where the paper curls away from the surface. The smell grows stronger, more distinct. It reminds me of the taste you get when you bite your tongue too hard. I smooth the paper back down with my palm. The adhesive feels warm, warmer than it should be. The texture underneath isn't quite right either. Not the smooth plaster I remember when I first moved in. This feels softer, more giving, like pressing against something alive. The paper stays down for exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning, I find it peeled back again. This time there are more strips. They've curled into spirals, some tight, others loose. The pattern they form looks almost deliberate, almost like letters trying to spell something. I take a photograph with my phone. The image shows nothing but blank wall. I take another. Same result. The camera refuses to capture what I'm seeing. I decide to document this properly. I start keeping a journal, writing down each morning's discovery. The smell, the temperature, the way the paper curls, the patterns it forms. I sketch them carefully, though my drawings never quite capture the unsettling quality of the real thing, the way the edges seem to move when I'm not looking directly at them. A week passes, the peeling spreads to other walls, first the bedroom, then the kitchen. Each morning brings new configurations. The metallic smell grows stronger. I buy different adhesives, industrial strength, the kind used for outdoor billboards. It doesn't matter. The paper continues to peel. It's as if something underneath is pushing outward, trying to break free. I start sleeping in the living room, away from the worst of it, but the peeling follows me. I wake one morning to find strips hanging from the ceiling. They sway slightly in the still air. There's no draft, no air conditioning running, yet they move like seaweed in a gentle current. The word appears on a Tuesday. I remember because I was supposed to meet someone for lunch, someone I'd been avoiding. When I see the letters formed by the curled paper, I cancel the meeting. I can't leave, not when the wall is finally trying to tell me something. It's written in the old script I used to practice, the careful penmanship I learned before everything went wrong, before I stopped speaking that word, before I promised myself I'd never let it cross my lips again. The paper has somehow remembered the shape of my handwriting, the particular way I used to curve the letters when I was younger, when I was careless with words. I try to tear down the strips, but they resist. They feel thicker now, more substantial, like fabric instead of paper. When I pull too hard, they stretch rather than rip. The sound they make is wet, organic, like pulling tape off skin. The smell becomes overwhelming. I open every window, but the air outside smells the same. The metallic scent has somehow leaked beyond the apartment walls, or maybe it was never confined to them. Maybe it was always everywhere, and I'm only now learning to notice it. I stop leaving the apartment. I call in sick to work. I order groceries online. I need to stay and watch, to document everything. The patterns are becoming more complex. The word repeats now, written in different sizes across multiple walls, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, sometimes in languages I don't recognize but somehow understand. The paper starts peeling in real time. I watch it curl away from the wall like a slow-motion flower blooming. The surface underneath pulses more visibly now. The red has deepened to burgundy. There are veins running through it. They branch and split like a river delta. When I press my ear against it, I can hear something, a sound like whispers or maybe breathing. I record everything, hours of audio, but when I play it back, there's only silence. The recording equipment captures nothing, just like the camera, just like everything else that should provide proof but doesn't. The phenomena exist only for me, only in my presence, only when I'm watching. Sleep becomes impossible. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the paper peeling. the soft, wet sound of it separating from the wall. When I open them, more strips have fallen. The word grows larger, more insistent. The handwriting becomes more recognizable, more undeniably mine. I realize I've been unconsciously mouthing the word, shaping it with my lips without making sound. The muscle memory is still there, even after all these years of silence, even after all my promises to keep it buried. The wall seems to respond to these tiny movements. The pulsing quickens when my lips form the familiar shape. On the 15th night, I wake to find the paper completely gone from one wall. Not peeled, not fallen, simply absent. The surface underneath is fully exposed now. Raw and red and obviously alive, it breathes. I can see it expanding and contracting. The veins pulse with each breath. The whispers are louder now, clear enough to make out individual syllables. They're speaking the word over and over, in my voice, in the exact pronunciation I used to use. The wall has learned to imitate me perfectly. It's saying the word I've kept locked away for years. The word I swore I'd never speak again. The word that changed everything the last time I said it. I try to run, to break free from whatever this is, but the door won't open. The handle turns, but the door remains sealed. The windows are the same. They look like they should open, but they're solid, immovable. I'm trapped with my own voice echoing from the walls, with the word I've been trying to forget. The remaining wallpaper begins to peel faster. Long strips cascade to the floor like shed skin. The exposed wall surface spreads, more breathing, more whispering. The metallic smell becomes so strong I can taste it. It coats the inside of my mouth like syrup. I press my back against the door and watch as the last of the paper falls away. The entire apartment is alive now, walls breathing in rhythm, veins pulsing with unknown circulation. The whispers have become a chorus, dozens of voices, all mine, all speaking the same forbidden word. I open my mouth to scream, but the word comes out instead. After years of silence, I finally speak it again. The sound of my own voice joins the chorus. The walls pulse faster. The breathing deepens. The metallic taste fills my throat. The word hangs in the air like a physical thing. I can see it now, not just hear it. It has shape and weight and presence. It settles into the room like smoke, like fog, like something that was always meant to be here. And I remember now why I stopped saying it, why I promised myself I'd never speak it again, because words have power, especially words like this one. Words that call things, words that open doors, words that invite something in. The walls are fully alive now. They pulse with my heartbeat, they breathe with my lungs, they whisper with my voice, and I understand that I'm not trapped in here with them. They're not trapped in here with me. We're all trapped in here together. The word has made us one. I sit on the floor and watch the veins branch across the ceiling. The whispers continue, my voice speaking the word I can never unsay, the word that has always been waiting for me to remember it, to speak it again, to let it remake the world in its image. The metallic smell fades. It's familiar now, comforting, like vanilla and coffee, like home, like the taste of words that were always meant to be spoken. The walls breathe around me, with me. We are synchronized now. We are complete. And in the morning, when the sun rises, I wake to find new wallpaper, fresh and clean and perfectly applied, but I can see the word underneath, written in veins beneath the surface, waiting, pulsing, ready to peel through again whenever it chooses. The apartment looks normal to visitors. The camera captures nothing unusual. The recording equipment finds only silence, but I know what lies beneath. I know what the word has made. And I know that next time I won't try to paste the paper back down. Next time I'll let it peel. I'll let it breathe. I'll let it speak. Because some words can't be forgotten. Some words can't be silenced. Some words remake the world simply by being remembered, and once they're spoken, they echo forever, in walls, in whispers, in the space between sleeping and waking where truth lives without shame. The word is still there, still pulsing, still waiting, and I am still here too, still listening, still learning its rhythm, still becoming whatever it needs me to become. Story 14, it responded to voice, my voice, a creak here, a pop there. At first I thought it was settling, but then I began testing it, whispering, shouting, singing. Each time a different part of the house answered back, not with sound, but movement, flickering light, shifting shadows. Until one day I said hello, and something knocked from inside the closet. The first response had been subtle, a gentle groan from the floorboards when I hummed while making coffee. The wooden planks beneath my feet shifted almost imperceptibly, like breathing. I dismissed it as old construction, the natural expansion and contraction of materials. Houses make noise, everyone knows that. But the pattern emerged gradually. Every spoken word, every whispered thought, every cleared throat triggered something. The kitchen faucet would drip once when I said water. The bathroom door would creak open when I mentioned shower. The living room lamp would dim when I spoke of darkness. I started keeping notes, blue ink on yellow paper, documenting each vocal trigger and its corresponding response. The house seemed to be learning my voice, cataloging my sounds. When I read aloud from books, the pages would flutter in windless rooms. When I talked on the phone, static would creep through the line, distorting my words until they became unrecognizable. The smell began appearing after I'd been documenting for several weeks. Sweet vanilla mixed with something metallic, like copper pennies left in sugar. It would waft through rooms whenever I tested new vocal combinations. The scent seemed to follow my voice, lingering in spaces where I'd spoken loudest. I tried remaining silent for entire days, but the house grew restless. Doors would slam shut on their own. The refrigerator would hum louder. The heating system would click and whistle incessantly. It wanted me to speak. It needed the sound of my voice to respond, to interact, to exist in some strange symbiosis I didn't understand. The walls began feeling different under my palms, warm in some spots, cold in others, pulsing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat when I spoke. I would place my hand against the plaster and whisper numbers, feeling the surface vibrate with each digit. The house was absorbing my voice, storing it somehow in its very structure. Reflections in mirrors started showing delays. I would speak, and my reflection would mouth the words a fraction of a second later, as if the house was intercepting my voice before allowing it to reach the glass. The lag grew longer each day, until my reflection seemed to be speaking entirely different words, its lips moving to sounds I couldn't hear. I installed recording equipment, hoping to capture evidence of the responses. But the devices malfunctioned whenever I spoke directly into them. The audio would distort, stretching my voice into low, unintelligible moans. Playback revealed layers of sound I hadn't made, whispers beneath whispers, conversations I'd never had, words in languages I didn't recognize. The temperature changes intensified. Speaking in the basement made the air thick and humid. Talking in the attic created pockets of freezing cold that would move across the room like invisible entities. The house was developing thermal personalities, responding to my voice with environmental shifts that defied explanation. I began testing specific words, trying to map the house's vocabulary. Door would make hinges squeak, window would cause glass to fog, light would make bulbs flicker, but some words triggered more complex responses. Memory would fill rooms with the vanilla metal scent. Fear would make the walls vibrate. Alone would cause complete silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The responses grew more sophisticated. When I said I'm hungry, the refrigerator would open. When I mentioned tired, the bedroom lights would dim. The house was learning not just my voice, but my needs, my patterns, my intentions. It was becoming responsive to my existence in ways that felt increasingly intimate and invasive. I tried bringing others inside, hoping to prove I wasn't losing my mind, but the house remained silent for them. They would speak, shout, sing, and nothing would happen. The responses were exclusively mine, a private conversation between my voice and something that lived within the walls. The breaking point came when I discovered the house was speaking back in my own voice. Late at night, I would hear myself talking in distant rooms, conversations I'd never had, thoughts I'd never spoken aloud. The house had been recording me, storing my voice, and now it was using it to communicate with itself. I stood in the hallway, listening to my own voice discussing things I'd never experienced, describing places I'd never been, speaking to people I'd never met. The house had become a repository of my voice, but it was generating content I hadn't provided. It was creating new conversations using my vocal patterns, my inflections, my speech rhythms. When I finally whispered hello into the closet, the knock that answered came from inside, sharp and deliberate. 3 measured taps, as if someone was trapped within the walls, using my greeting as permission to respond. The sound came from deep within the structure, not from the closet itself, but from somewhere behind it, beyond it, inside the bones of the house. I placed my ear against the closet door and heard my own voice whispering back, muffled and distorted, speaking words I couldn't understand but recognized as mine. The house had been collecting my voice, storing it, fermenting it into something new, and now it was trying to communicate using the only language it knew, me. The knocking continued, following me through the house, 3 taps in response to every word I spoke. The house had learned to knock back in my rhythm, using my own vocal patterns as a template for its physical responses. It was speaking to me in percussion, using my voice as a drum beat for its architectural communications. I still live here, but I've learned to whisper. The house responds more gently to quiet voices, as if it's listening more carefully, paying closer attention to nuanced sounds. Sometimes I hear it practicing my voice in empty rooms, rehearsing conversations we've never had, preparing for discussions I haven't planned. The vanilla metal scent has become constant now, a permanent fixture in my daily life. My reflection in mirrors has stopped trying to match my movements entirely, and the knocking has evolved into complex patterns, not just responses, but initiated conversations, the house using my voice's rhythm to start its own discussions. I've stopped trying to understand what it wants. Instead, I've learned to live with the reality that my voice has become part of something larger, something that exists in the spaces between words, in the echoes that linger after I've finished speaking. The house and I have developed a language that exists only in the intersection of sound and structure, voice and response, human and something else entirely. Story 15, steam, frost, moisture. It would appear on the mirror regardless of temperature. A thin layer of condensation spelling out strange, indecipherable patterns. I never saw them form. But one day I wiped the glass clean and saw something carved into it, inside the glass, not on the surface. 3 vertical lines, then a circle, and behind my reflection, the hint of something tall and still. The apartment came furnished, and the mirror was already there when I moved in. An antique piece, heavy silver backing, ornate frame that seemed too elaborate for such a modest bathroom. The landlord mentioned it belonged to the previous tenant, who had left it behind. I didn't think much of it then. The first peculiarity I noticed was the condensation. Even on dry days when the heater wasn't running, when I hadn't showered, the mirror would fog up, not completely, but in patches. Geometric shapes that looked almost deliberate. I would trace them with my finger, feeling the cool dampness, wondering if there was a leak somewhere in the walls. I started keeping a small notebook, documenting the patterns, triangles mostly, sometimes interlocking circles. The shapes would appear in different sections of the mirror, never in the same place twice. I sketched them carefully, noting the humidity levels in the apartment, the outside temperature, any changes in weather. Nothing correlated. The carved lines came later. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed them through the fog. 3 perfectly vertical scratches, about an inch long each, etched into the glass itself. Not surface scratches that could be polished out, but deep grooves that seemed to run through the entire thickness of the mirror. Below them, a circle, precise and clean. I ran my fingers over the surface, smooth. The marks were definitely inside the glass, suspended in the silver backing like insects in amber. I couldn't remember them being there before, but old mirrors developed flaws. I I told myself it was normal aging, oxidation creating patterns in the reflective coating. Then I saw the figure. It was subtle at first, a shadow that didn't quite match my movements. When I raised my left hand, my reflection would raise its right a fraction of a second later. When I turned my head, the reflection would follow, but with a slight delay, as if it were copying me rather than mirroring me. I began testing it. I would make sudden movements, watching carefully. The delay was always there, barely perceptible but consistent. I started recording myself with my phone, holding it up to capture both me and my reflection simultaneously. In the videos, everything looked normal. The mirror behaved exactly as it should. But standing there, watching directly, I could see the hesitation, the pause, the careful mimicry. The carved marks multiplied. New lines appeared, horizontal ones intersecting the vertical scratches. More circles, some overlapping, creating intricate patterns that reminded me of circuit boards or neural networks. I documented each new addition, photographing the mirror from different angles, trying to capture the marks clearly. The photographs showed nothing, an ordinary mirror with ordinary reflections. But in person, the etchings were unmistakable, growing more complex each day. I started avoiding the bathroom. I would brush my teeth in the kitchen sink, shower with my eyes closed or facing away from the mirror. But even when I wasn't looking directly at it, I could feel its presence. The condensation would form whether I was there or not, and I would return to find new patterns, new marks, new evidence of something I couldn't understand. The breaking point came when I woke up one morning and found handprints on the mirror. Not mine, the fingers were too long, the palm too narrow. They were pressed against the glass from the inside, as if someone were trapped within the reflection, trying to push through. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox, determined to smash the thing and be done with it. But as I raised the tool, I caught sight of my reflection, and it wasn't holding a hammer. It was holding something else, something that gleamed like metal but had too many edges, too many angles to be any tool I recognized. I stopped, my reflection stopped. We stared at each other across the barrier of glass, two different people performing the same scene with different props. I lowered the hammer. My reflection lowered its impossible tool. That night I covered the mirror with a sheet. In the morning, the sheet was on the floor, folded neatly beside the sink. The mirror was uncovered, and the condensation had formed words. Not in any language I recognized, but unmistakably letters, characters that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. I moved out the next week. The landlord seemed unsurprised, mentioning that the previous tenant had left suddenly too. He didn't ask about the mirror, and I didn't mention it. But sometimes in public restrooms or store changing rooms, I catch glimpses of those same marks reflected in other mirrors. The three vertical lines, the circle, the intricate patterns spreading like veins through the glass, and occasionally in my peripheral vision, I see the figure tall and still, watching me from depths that shouldn't exist. I've stopped looking directly at mirrors when I can avoid it. But reflection is everywhere, in windows, in puddles, in the black screens of phones and computers. And sometimes in those accidental glimpses, I see the hands pressed against the glass, the too long fingers, the narrow palms. Pushing through. Getting closer. The hammer is still in my toolbox, though I'm not sure anymore what good it would do. Some barriers aren't meant to be broken from this side. Some reflections aren't meant to be mere copies. And sometimes, late at night, I run my fingers along the walls of my new apartment, feeling for the slight vibration that means something is trying to push through from the other side, leaving marks that only I can see, patterns that only I can understand. The mirror had its own weather, but I think I was the storm it was waiting for. Story 16, only that room, every bulb, every lamp, every flashlight I brought in dead within seconds. The room was always dark, unnaturally so. Even candles would sputter. I tried standing in the doorway, letting the hall light in, but the darkness seemed to absorb it, and when I finally stepped inside, I heard a sharp breath right next to my ear. I had moved into the house 3 weeks earlier. Everything seemed normal at first, the kind of normal that comes with old wooden floors and windows that stick when you try to open them. But that room, the one at the end of the hallway, felt different from the beginning. The air was thicker there, almost syrupy, and it carried a faint smell of burnt metal that I couldn't identify. The first bulb burned out on my second day. I thought nothing of it, old wiring probably. I replaced it with a new one, and it lasted exactly 4 seconds before flickering out with a soft pop. The third bulb did the same, then the fourth. By the time I had gone through an entire box of bulbs, I started to pay attention. I bought a lamp at the hardware store, plugged it in, switched it on. The bulb glowed for a moment, then died. The lamp worked perfectly in every other room. I tested it multiple times, but the moment I brought it back to that room, the darkness claimed it. That's when I started documenting everything. I bought a notebook and began writing down each attempt, each failure. Lead bulbs, incandescent, halogen, battery-powered flashlights, nothing worked. The darkness in that room wasn't just the absence of light, it was something else, something that fed on illumination. I started spending more time in the doorway, studying the room from the safety of the hallway. The walls seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. Shadows moved independently of any light source, and there was always that smell of burnt metal, growing stronger each day. The first time I heard the breathing, I convinced myself it was the old heating system. Houses make noises, especially old ones, but heating systems don't pause, don't catch their breath like something listening, and they don't exhale warm air that smells like copper pennies. I started recording everything with my phone. Audio recordings of the room, videos of the light bulbs burning out, documentation of the temperature changes. The room was always several degrees cooler than the rest of the house, but my breath never fogged there. It was as if the air itself was being consumed. One evening, I placed a digital thermometer just inside the doorway. The numbers flickered constantly, jumping between readings as if the temperature was in constant flux. I watched the display for nearly an hour, mesmerized by the erratic dance of digits. When I finally looked up, I realized I couldn't see the back wall of the room anymore. The darkness had grown denser, more solid. I tried mirrors. If I couldn't bring light into the room, maybe I could reflect light from the hallway. I positioned a large mirror just inside the doorway, angling it to catch the hall light. The reflection showed the room clearly for a moment empty, with pale yellow walls and a single window covered by heavy curtains. But as I watched, the reflection began to change. The walls in the mirror started to darken, not from shadow, but from something seeping through the surface itself. The breathing grew louder. I began to obsess over the room. Sleep became difficult because I could feel it pulling at me, even with my bedroom door closed. I would lie awake listening to the subtle sounds coming from down the hall, not just breathing now, but soft shuffling, like someone shifting their weight from foot to foot. During the day, I found myself drawn to the doorway more frequently. I would stand there for longer periods, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, trying to see what was hiding in the depths of that room. Sometimes I thought I could make out a figure standing near the window, but when I blinked, it would be gone. The smell of burnt metal grew stronger, joined by something else, something organic and sweet, like flowers left too long in water. I started leaving glasses of water in the hallway nearby, checking them regularly. The water would develop a thin film on the surface, rainbow-colored like oil, even though nothing had touched it. I bought a Geiger counter, thinking maybe there was some kind of radiation causing the electrical problems. The device worked normally throughout the house, but when I brought it to the room's threshold, the clicking became irregular, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The walls began to feel different when I touched them. Not just cool, but soft, as if the plaster was gradually becoming something else. I pressed my palm against the wall just inside the doorway one afternoon and felt a gentle vibration, like a pulse running through the structure itself. When I pulled my hand away, there was a warm spot on the wall in the perfect shape of my palm. I stopped sleeping in the house. I rented a room nearby and returned each day to continue my observations. The room was changing more rapidly now. The darkness was spreading, creeping inch by inch into the hallway. I marked the progression with pencil lines on the floor, documenting how the boundary moved. Each day, the pencil marks would be swallowed by the expanding shadow. The breathing was constant now, no longer just when I entered the room. It followed me through the house, a steady rhythm that seemed to synchronize with my own heartbeat. When I held my breath, it would pause too, waiting. I brought in a specialist, someone who dealt with electrical problems in old houses. He stood in the doorway for less than a minute before leaving, claiming he had another appointment, but I saw his hands shaking as he packed his tools. He wouldn't look at me when he said the wiring was fine. The room started calling to me at night, not with words, but with a pull I could feel in my chest, a magnetic draw that made my ribs ache. I would find myself standing in the hallway in the middle of the night, fully dressed, keys in my hand, having driven back to the house without remembering the decision to do so. The darkness began to whisper, not words I could understand, but sounds that bypassed my ears and went straight to my bones. The whispers would start soft, almost like static, then grow until they filled my skull with a pressure that made my eyes water. I tried to seal the room. I bought plastic sheeting and tape, attempting to create a barrier between the room and the rest of the house. But the darkness seeped through the plastic like water through tissue paper. By morning, the sheeting would be lying in shreds on the floor, and the burnt metal smell would be stronger than ever. The final night, I couldn't resist anymore. The pull was too strong, the whispers too insistent. I walked into the room, into the absolute darkness, and felt it close around me like water. The breathing was everywhere now, in the walls, in the floor, in the air itself. Something touched my face, gentle as a breeze, but warm and definitely alive. I tried to scream, but the darkness swallowed the sound. I tried to run, but the room had no edges anymore, no walls or corners to guide me back to the door. I stumbled through the blackness, my hands reaching for anything solid, anything real. When I finally found the doorway, I was changed. The room had marked me somehow, left something behind in my chest that pulses with its own rhythm. Even now, weeks later, I can feel it beating alongside my heart, a second pulse that reminds me constantly that I am no longer alone in my own body. The house is empty now. I moved out, left everything behind. But sometimes in the quiet moments between day and night, I can still smell burnt metal in the air around me. And I know that somewhere in a room that should be empty, something is still breathing, still waiting, still growing stronger. The darkness follows me now, not visibly, but I can feel it in the spaces between shadows, in the corners of rooms where light doesn't quite reach. It's patient, this thing that lives in the dark. It has learned to wait, to watch, to spread itself thin across the world until it finds another room where the light bulbs burn out too quickly. And when that happens, when someone else discovers that darkness can be more than just the absence of light, I wonder if they'll hear the breathing too. If they'll feel the pull in their chest, the whispers in their bones. If they'll understand, as I now do, that some rooms are doorways to places that should never be opened. The burnt metal smell is getting stronger again. Story 17. I sat down as usual, but this time the cushions gave way far more than they should have. I sank lower and lower, the fabric rising to my shoulders. I tried to stand. The seat held me, not tightly but firmly like it wanted me to stay. I pulled free and found the cushion had torn slightly. Something inside it blinked. The living room felt different after that. The familiar scent of vanilla candles mixed with something else, something metallic and sharp, like copper pennies left in rain. I touched the tear in the cushion again, running my finger along the frayed edge. The fabric felt warm, almost feverish. Inside, I glimpsed what looked like dark fabric, but when I pressed closer, it seemed to shift away from my touch. I decided to document what I was seeing. I grabbed my phone and took photos of the torn cushion. Through the camera lens, everything looked normal, just worn upholstery and old foam stuffing. But with my naked eye, I could still see that glint of something that shouldn't be there. I set the phone aside and reached into the tier. My fingers found something smooth and yielding, not foam, not springs, something that felt like skin but cooler, and when I pressed it, it pressed back. I jerked my hand away and examined my fingertips. They were clean, but they tingled with a sensation I couldn't name, like the moment before you realize you've been burned. The next morning, I woke up on the couch. I had no memory of falling asleep there, but my neck ached as if I'd been in that position for hours. The tear in the cushion had grown larger. Through the gap, I could see more of that strange, dark material. It reminded me of the inside of a mouth, all shadowy and wet-looking, though when I touched it, it felt dry. I started keeping a notebook. Every morning, I measured the tear with a ruler. It was growing, not dramatically, but consistently. Half an inch wider each day, half an inch deeper. I wrote down everything, the metallic smell that grew stronger, the way the couch seemed to absorb sound around it, making the room feel muffled and distant. The worst part was the humming. It started so quietly I thought it was the refrigerator in the kitchen, but when I followed the sound, it led me back to the couch. I pressed my ear to the cushion, and the humming grew louder, more distinct, not mechanical, organic, like something breathing, but in reverse, taking in sound instead of air. I tried to ignore it. I moved my reading chair to the other side of the room, but the humming followed me. It wasn't coming from the couch anymore. It was coming from inside my head, a low vibration that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. The tear grew wider. I could fit my whole hand inside now, and when I did, I felt something brush against my palm. Not malicious, but curious, like fingers exploring fingers. I pulled back so fast I knocked over my coffee mug. The liquid splashed across the floor, but none of it touched the couch. The coffee stopped exactly 3 feet away, as if hitting an invisible barrier. I decided to test this. I rolled marbles across the floor toward the couch. They stopped at the same distance, not rolling back, just stopping. Dead, I threw a paperclip. It froze in midair for a moment, then dropped straight down. The space around the couch was changing, becoming something else. The humming in my head grew louder. I started hearing whispers threaded through it, not words I recognized, but sounds that felt like words. They seemed to be coming from the tear in the cushion, but when I looked directly at it, they stopped. Only in my peripheral vision could I see movement inside the gap, like shadows dancing. I brought a flashlight to examine the interior more closely. The beam illuminated what looked like a vast space inside the cushion, far larger than the couch itself. The walls weren't foam or fabric. They were smooth and dark, stretching beyond what the light could reach, and there were things moving in there, not crawling or walking, but flowing like liquid shadows with purpose. I reached for my phone to record this impossibility, but the screen showed only static. Every electronic device near the couch had begun malfunctioning. The television displayed channels that didn't exist, broadcasting programs in languages I'd never heard. The radio picked up conversations that seemed to be happening inside my walls. The tier was now large enough that I could see inside without effort. The space beyond defied logic. It wasn't a cavity inside furniture, but a place. A real place with depth and distance, and something in there was looking back at me. I felt eyes on me constantly now, not threatening but intensely curious, like being studied by something that had never seen a human before. The sensation followed me to other rooms, but it was strongest near the couch. I started sleeping in the bedroom with the door locked, but even there I could hear the humming, feel the weight of that attention. The couch began to change shape. Subtly at first, a slight sag here, a minor shift there, but gradually it was becoming something else. The arms elongated, the back curved inward, creating a shape that looked almost like a mouth. The tier had become a perfect oval now, dark and inviting. I knew I should leave, pack my things, and go somewhere else, but every time I moved toward the door, the humming grew so loud it made me dizzy. My legs felt heavy, uncooperative. The couch wanted me to stay, and some part of me, a part that was growing stronger each day, wanted to stay too. I started having dreams where I was inside that dark space, floating in warm shadows while voices whispered secrets I couldn't remember upon waking. In these dreams, I wasn't alone. There were others like me, people who had found their way inside and chosen to remain. They seemed happy, content in a way I'd never been. The boundary around the couch expanded. Now I had to step over an invisible line to enter the kitchen. The metallic smell had given way to something sweeter, like flowers left too long in water. The humming wasn't just in my head anymore. It was in the walls, the floor, the air itself. I made one last attempt to document what was happening. I set up a camera on a tripod, pointing it at the couch. But when I reviewed the footage, I saw only an empty room. No couch, no tier, no impossible space, just bare floor where furniture should have been. That's when I realized the truth. The couch wasn't changing. My perception was shifting, adapting to see what was always there. The tier wasn't growing, my understanding of it was expanding. The humming wasn't getting louder, I was learning to hear it better. I sit on the couch now and it fits me perfectly. The cushions cradle my body with impossible comfort. Through the tier, I can see the vast space beyond, and I understand that it's not a place to fear. It's a place to belong. The humming has become a song. The shadows have become friends. And when I sink into the cushions, deeper than physics should allow, I'm not trapped. I'm home. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the old world, the one where couches are just furniture and tiers are just damage. But that world feels distant now, like a memory from someone else's life. This is better. This is real. The couch sunk too deep and I followed it down. Now I'm waiting for the next person to sit beside me, to feel the cushions give way, to discover what I've discovered. The tier is ready. The shadows are patient. And there's so much room inside for anyone willing to let go of what they think they know. The humming continues, and I hum along. Story 18. At the back, behind the drawers, there was a seam I'd never noticed. A rectangle of metal bolted into the back panel. I removed the shelves and started pulling. The metal gave way, revealing a hatch with no handle, just a slit. I leaned close. From the other side came the faint smell of dirt and something tapping slowly from inside. The refrigerator had been making noise for weeks, not the usual hum of the compressor, but a rhythmic scratching that seemed to come from somewhere deeper. I'd checked the coils, cleaned the vents, even called a repair service. The technician found nothing wrong. The scratching continued. I started keeping notes. The sound appeared mostly during the quiet hours when the house settled into its evening stillness. It would begin as a whisper, barely audible above the ambient noise of the kitchen. Then it would grow more insistent, like fingernails dragging across metal from within the walls themselves. The smell of dirt had been there too, though I dismissed it as something tracked in from the garden. But now, with my face pressed against the cold metal of the hatch, I could identify its source. It was rich and loamy, like soil after rain, but underneath lay something else. Something organic and stale. The tapping stopped when I touched the hatch. The silence felt deliberate, as if whatever was on the other side was listening. I pressed my ear against the metal. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to pull away, I heard breathing. Slow, measured breaths that didn't quite match the rhythm of my own. I found a thin knife in the drawer and worked it into the slit. The hatch opened with surprising ease, as if it had been designed to be accessed from this side. Behind it lay a narrow tunnel, no wider than my shoulders, disappearing into darkness. The smell of earth rushed out, carrying with it that underlying scent of decay that made my stomach turn. The walls of the tunnel were lined with what looked like compacted soil, but when I touched them they felt wrong. Too smooth, too uniform. They seemed to pulse slightly under my fingertips as if they were alive. The temperature was constant, neither warm nor cold, but somehow wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. I retrieved a flashlight from the utility drawer and shone it down the tunnel. The beam revealed a passage that extended far beyond what should have been possible given the dimensions of my house. The walls curved gently, creating the illusion of a throat leading into some vast, hidden anatomy. The tapping resumed, echoing from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. It had a pattern now, 3 quick taps followed by a longer pause, over and over like a code or a heartbeat. Each time it repeated, it seemed to come from a different location, as if the source was moving through the walls themselves. I began to document everything: the dimensions of the hatch, the texture of the tunnel walls, the exact timing of the tapping. I recorded the sounds with my phone, but when I played them back, they sounded different, distorted, as if something was interfering with the recording, changing the pitch and rhythm in ways that made my ears ache. The tunnel was affecting the rest of the house too. The kitchen faucet started dripping, but only when I was near the refrigerator. The overhead light would flicker, dimming and brightening in sync with the tapping. The floor tiles felt different underfoot, slightly warmer than they should be, as if something was generating heat from below. Sleep became impossible. The tapping would start the moment I closed my eyes, pulling me back to the kitchen. I found myself standing before the open hatch at all hours, staring into the darkness, trying to understand what I was seeing. The tunnel seemed to be growing, or perhaps my perception of it was changing. What had once appeared to be a simple passage now revealed branches and alcoves, a network of spaces that shouldn't exist. I started leaving offerings, food scraps, small objects, anything that might satisfy whatever was creating the sounds. The items would disappear, though I never saw them taken. In their place I would find other things, smooth stones that were warm to the touch, fragments of metal that hummed when I held them. Once, a piece of paper with writing I couldn't read, in a script that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at it. The breathing grew louder, not just one set of lungs, but many, overlapping and out of sync. They created a rhythm that was almost musical, a harmony that resonated through the walls and into my bones. I began to feel compelled to match their tempo, to synchronize my own breathing with theirs, until I couldn't tell where their respiration ended and mine began. My reflection in the refrigerator door started to look wrong, not dramatically different, but subtly altered. My eyes seemed darker, my skin paler. Sometimes I would catch myself staring into the polished steel surface for long periods, watching my face change in ways that should have been impossible. The reflection would smile when I wasn't smiling, blink when my eyes were open. The tunnel was calling to me now, not with sound, but with a pull that I felt in my chest, a gravitational force that made it difficult to leave the kitchen. I would stand at the threshold, one hand on the edge of the hatch, feeling the cool air flow over my fingers. The darkness beyond seemed warm and welcoming, like a familiar embrace. I tried to seal the hatch, but the metal wouldn't stay closed. I used tape, screws, even welded it shut with a torch I borrowed from a neighbor. Each morning I would find it open again, the seal broken from the inside. The tunnel was patient but persistent. It waited for me to understand that resistance was futile. The house began to change around me. Walls that had been solid now felt hollow when I knocked on them. The basement door, which had always been locked, stood ajar, revealing stairs that descended far deeper than they should have. The entire structure seemed to be transforming, becoming something else, something that existed in the spaces between what I thought I knew about my home. On the final night, I entered the tunnel, not by choice, but because there was no longer a choice to make. The breathing had synchronized with my heartbeat, and the tapping had become a summons I couldn't ignore. I crawled through the narrow passage, my flashlight beam revealing walls that now pulsed with visible life, surfaces that glistened with moisture that wasn't quite water. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The walls were lined with doors, hundreds of them, each one different, but all bearing the same quality of wrongness that had marked the hatch in my refrigerator. Some were open, revealing spaces beyond that defied geometry. Others were sealed, but I could hear sounds from behind them. Voices, music, machinery, all blending into a symphony of the impossible. I understood then that my house was just one connection in a vast network, a single node in a system that spanned distances I couldn't comprehend. The tapping hadn't been a request for entry. It had been a greeting, a welcome to a community I never knew existed. I tried to return the way I had come, but the tunnel had changed. The passage that had brought me here was gone, replaced by others that led to places I didn't recognize. I was no longer a visitor in this space. I was a resident. The breathing continues. It comes from everywhere now, from the walls, from the air itself. Sometimes I add my voice to the chorus, and sometimes I tap out messages on the walls, hoping someone on the other side will hear and understand. My refrigerator probably makes noise now. Someone else is probably standing in their kitchen, listening to the scratching, trying to rationalize what they're hearing. They'll find the hatch eventually. They'll smell the dirt and hear the tapping. And they'll discover that some doors once opened can never be closed again.